Hi everyone, this is Miss Lasar here, and I'm going to tell you about molecules today, specifically biological molecules. So let's start in the obvious place by answering the question, what is a molecule? A molecule is multiple atoms connected together by chemical bonds. Here's an example of a small molecule. Each circle represents an atom. So I've got 3 atoms here, 2 H atoms, those are hydrogens, 1 O atom, that's an oxygen. And I can write the name of this molecule, H2O, in a way that tells me I've got 2 hydrogen atoms and 1 oxygen atom. I can also write the common name of this molecule, which is water. You might have recognized it. And these lines that are connecting the atoms together, those are chemical bonds. And they're not a physical thing. It's actually energy that's shared between these atoms. But we represent it by a line showing that these atoms are connected together. This is a larger molecule, more of a mid-sized molecule. This is actually caffeine, and we can see that there are different atoms connected together here. The lines between them represent the chemical bonds that are holding those atoms together. Quick recap about atoms. You might have seen this before. This is the periodic table of the elements, and this shows us that there are over 100 different types of atoms that can be used to build molecules. The letters on the atom are an abbreviation for its name. For example, C stands for carbon. As you can see on this table, some of the abbreviations are a little unexpected, like W is the abbreviation for tungsten, but these are the scientific abbreviations that all scientists have agreed on to use to abbreviate the name of each atom type, otherwise known as the name of each element. So there are some atoms that you're going to need to be familiar with this year, and they are the atoms that are most common in living organisms. There's 5 types of atoms, 5 elements that are most commonly found in living organisms, and they are carbon, C stands for carbon, oxygen, O stands for oxygen, hydrogen, H stands for hydrogen, N stands for nitrogen, and P stands for phosphorus. And so these 5 are the most commonly found elements in living things, but there's other elements, other types of atoms that are also common in living things that you might see in the near future, and they include S, which stands for sulfur, Fe, which stands for iron, Mg, which stands for magnesium, Na, which stands for sodium, K, which stands for potassium, and Ca, which stands for calcium. And all of these are important to living things, but these 5 are used to build most of the molecules that are found in living organisms. So speaking of the molecules that are found in living organisms, we're going to be looking at those molecules today, and we can draw molecules many different ways. I'm going to show you 4 pictures that all show the caffeine molecule that you saw earlier. So this first image shows you each atom represented as a sphere, and the color of the sphere represents the type of atom we're looking at. Black is carbon, red is oxygen, white is hydrogen, blue is nitrogen. The lines between the spheres show us the chemical bonds. 2 lines show us what's called a double bond. 1 line shows us what's called a single bond. And I can draw the molecule like this, or instead of drawing each atom as a sphere, I can just write the letter that represents what type of atom. So these 2 represent the same thing. Now, instead of drawing a sphere, a black sphere for carbon, I can just write the letter C. And this carbon is double bonded to an oxygen. There it is, a carbon double bonded to O, which stands for oxygen. So I can actually simplify this even more. One technique that's used by scientists, and you'll learn this next year in chemistry, is not drawing any of the C's or H's, and instead just using straight and bent lines to represent the C's and H's, the carbons and hydrogens. So again, this shows the same molecule. I've got a carbon double bonded to an oxygen here. And again, I'm not drawing the C or the H. And I can go one step further. I can simplify this even more just by drawing the overall shape. I see a hexagon connected to a pentagon. So if I was going to really simplify things, I could draw this, a hexagon bonded to a pentagon. And you can see that some of these diagrams, like these 2, show us a ton of detail, whereas other diagrams like this one show us much less detail. but they're all representing the same thing. They're all representing the caffeine molecule. Okay, so there's two types of molecules that we're going to be looking at today, organic and inorganic molecules. Organic molecules are molecules that contain a CH or carbon-hydrogen bond. And here are some examples. Here's caffeine that you've seen a couple times. Let's look for the CH bond. There it is. There's one, there's one, there's one, there's one. Then we've got some CH bonds that are kind of hidden by the perspective of the molecule. There's a bunch of them. This is a small molecule. It's an unusual one. It's cyanide. And even though there's only 3 atoms here, look, we've got a CH bond. That's all we need. This is an organic molecule. On the flip side, we have inorganic molecules. These are molecules that don't contain a CH carbon-hydrogen bond. And here are 2 examples. This is carbon dioxide. We can see a carbon bonded to 2 oxygens. There's no carbon-hydrogen bond here, but there is a carbon. Doesn't count. This is water. Again, we've got hydrogens now, but we don't have a carbon-hydrogen bond. This is an inorganic molecule as well. You might be wondering, why do we care about the difference between these? Well, we care about organic molecules because they can only be made by living things. And so when we look and see organic molecules, we know they've been made by a living thing, and living things are mostly made out of organic molecules. And we're going to be looking at some different large organic molecules today. So the next category of molecules we're going to talk about has to do with the structure of the molecules. On the left, I've got 4 Lego blocks, and each Lego block represents a monomer. A monomer, look at my definition on the bottom of the screen, is a small molecule. And when I say a small molecule, I mean usually less than 30 atoms. On the right-hand side, I've taken those 4 blocks, those 4 monomers, and I've just built them into a little Lego tower. This Lego tower represents a polymer. A polymer is a large molecule made of multiple monomers connected together. So I can see multiple pieces repeating over and over, put together into this chain. That is a polymer. Let's recap again the connection between atoms, molecules, monomers, and polymers. Here I have some atoms. Each circle represents an atom. The letters tell me what type of atom: carbon, oxygen, and hydrogen. I can connect those together with chemical bonds to build a small molecule. This is a monomer. A small molecule is a monomer. And then if I had many of these monomers and I connected the monomers together, then I could build something like this, a giant chain made of the same monomers repeating over and over. This is a large molecule of many monomers connected together. This is a polymer. So you might be wondering, do we have to have the same monomer repeating over and over in a polymer? Well, not really. Polymers can be made of the same monomer repeated over and over, just like this, where I've got the same yellow block connected together into a chain of identical blocks. Or polymers can be made of slightly different monomers connected together. And you can see what I mean in this picture. I've got slightly different blocks connected together into a long chain. The only difference is the color, so it's a small difference. And this still counts as a polymer. Each of these are individual monomers, and they've been connected into a polymer here. What about the length of the chain? Does the length of the chain matter? Yes. If we have just one small molecule, we already said that's called a monomer. If we have 2 small molecules bonded together, that's called a dimer. So these prefixes mean something. Mono means 1. Di means 2. So we have 1 molecule, monomer. 2 molecules is a dimer. 3 molecules bonded together. Think to yourself what prefix means 3. Tri, like a tricycle. This is a trimer. 3 small molecules bonded together. And then once we get to 4, now we call this a polymer. So many 4 or more small molecules bonded together. This is officially a polymer. So we're going to kind of change directions here. What I'm showing you right now is actually a picture of polymers. I'm also showing you a picture of a cell. because cells are made of molecules. Cells are made of large molecules like polymers. Every shape that you see in this image, you can see kind of the outer membrane of the cell, the interior of the cell here. This is about half a cell. Every shape you see on here is a large molecule, a polymer. And there are 4 important biological polymers that I'm going to tell you about right now. The first important type of polymer, carbohydrates. And in this cell, we can see carbohydrates as part of what's called the extracellular matrix. All of these long squiggly guys are carbohydrates on the outside of the cell. Lipids is the next biological polymer, and we can see lipids in this light green, this very light green band around the cell. That's the cell membrane, which is made out of lipids. Nucleic acids are another important biological polymer, and these light pink squiggly things, those are probably strands of RNA, which is a type of nucleic acid. And then finally, we have proteins, and proteins are pretty much everything else. All of these interesting shapes, these are all proteins, and they are all doing different jobs in the cell. So most of what we see on here, most of these large molecules are proteins. And let's start with proteins. They're the most important type of biological polymer in the cell. The monomer of a protein is called an amino acid, and the polymer of a protein is called a polypeptide, or sometimes it's just called a protein. So here's what we're going to be looking at. Proteins will be a polymer that's kind of like this example. They're made of multiple similar but not identical monomers joined together. And here's more specifically what we're looking at. On the left, we've got our monomers, which are amino acids. And you can see all the different colors to represent the different types of amino acids. And on the right, we've connected each of those monomers together with a chemical bond, and we've actually twisted up the chain into a particular shape. And this is our polymer, which is called a polypeptide, or just called a protein. And if you're wondering, there are 21 different kinds of amino acids. So I couldn't even represent that in this picture. There are so many varieties, but there's a ton of different monomers that are all similar and can all be built together into a long polypeptide. Let's talk about function. The function of proteins is really broad. They do all jobs in the cell. And I'm going to show you some examples in a moment. Some examples of proteins that you might want to know about include hemoglobin, myosin, actin, and lactase. And I'm going to tell you now what jobs each of these proteins do. Hemoglobin is the first. So here's a picture of hemoglobin. It's the purple squiggly lines. This is a protein that can hold on to oxygen. And because it can hold on to oxygen, it can carry it around the body in your red blood cells. So hemoglobin is a really important protein that will grab onto oxygen in your lungs, carry it through your blood, and then give it to whatever body cells need that oxygen. The second type of protein I'm going to show you is lactase, and it's the hot pink shape that you're going to see down here. Lactase is a type of protein called an enzyme, which is a protein that can break or build molecules. And lactase breaks lactose apart into glucose and galactose. And it's okay if those words are overwhelming to you. Just watch what happens. Look at the circle connected to the hexagon that go into the hot pink lactase. Lactase breaks them apart into 2 separate molecules, the circle glucose and the hexagon galactose. And here is my favorite pair of proteins because they're so cute. Down here on the bottom, this wire is actin. This is a protein that forms long fibers that act as structural support for the cell. And this little cutie is myosin. This is an amazing protein that can move. It can walk along actin filaments. So it can walk along actin filaments and it can move things through the cell. You can see that this end of the myosin is attached to this bubble. There's probably something interesting in that bubble, like some fats or some carbohydrates, and we're essentially transporting that across the cell. This movement of myosin walking along actin is also what causes muscle contraction and allows you to move your body. Our next category is carbohydrates. And again, we'll start with the monomer and polymer. The monomer of all carbohydrates are called monosaccharides. Mono means one. Saccharide means carbohydrate, so one carbohydrate. The polymer of carbohydrates are called polysaccharides. And the best way for me to show you what I mean is to show you examples of monomers, polymers, and actually we have a dimer in carbohydrates as well. So just so you know, carbohydrates are more like this example. They're usually made of multiple identical monomers connected together, not like proteins. Here are our monosaccharide varieties, and you don't need to write down these 3 varieties, but it's good to get an idea of the different kinds of monosaccharides. Glucose is by far our most important. It's a hexagon, but we've also got galactose, which is a slightly different hexagon, and fructose, which is a pentagon. We have some disaccharides. Sucrose, table sugar, is glucose connected to fructose, and lactose on the bottom, which is the sugar in milk that some people are intolerant to, is galactose connected to glucose. And these are disaccharides, dimers, 2 monomers joined together. Then we've got our polysaccharides, our polymers, and we've got 3, cellulose, starch, and glycogen. And actually all of these are different forms of glucose bonded together into long chains. So let's talk about function now. And different carbohydrates have different functions. I'm going to tell you the function of each. Glucose, this monomer, stores energy that can be released quickly. Cellulose, which is one of these long chains, one of these polymers, provides structural support for plant and bacterial cells. Glycogen and starch are both long-term storage of energy. Glycogen is how animals store energy for the long term, and starch is how plants store energy for the long term. As humans, we store a lot of glycogen in our liver, and when we need some short-term energy, we actually break that glycogen back down into the glucose that it's made of. Plants, think of a potato full of starch. That's a storage of energy that can be broken down by the plant in the future. And again, some examples include glucose, cellulose, glycogen, and starch. Our next important category of biological polymers is lipids. And these are unusual because there's 2 different monomers that are used to build lipids, fatty acids and glycerol. And they're built into polymers, but the polymers don't have a specific name, don't have a general name, don't have a category name. We just use the specific name of the lipid molecule itself. For example, phospholipids, the polymer is just called a phospholipid. In triglycerides, the polymer is just called a triglyceride. Let me show you what I mean. And just so you know, lipid structure is actually more complicated than this. We are simplifying this for now. There's a lot of variation in real lipid structure, but you can ignore that for now. So here are some new Legos that I'm using to represent lipids and how we build them. We can see our monomers all separated right now. And these long skinny molecules, those are glycerol monomers. And then these shorter, fatter Legos, those are fatty acids. And so you can see the picture on the left. We're going to put 3 fatty acids and 1 glycerol together. For this one, we're going to put 2 fatty acids and 1 glycerol together. And so this one, fully built, this is our polymer. This is a triglyceride. And over here, 2 fatty acids plus a glycerol, this is a phospholipid. And again, the polymer name would just be the name phospholipid or triglyceride. So let's talk function. Triglycerides are what you think of as fat from fatty food, fat that you store in your body. Those fats store energy for the long term. And when the body needs that energy, it can break apart that molecule and use the energy that's stored in it. Phospholipids, remember that was 1 glycerol and 2 fatty acids, they actually create a waterproof membrane around all cells. So you can see this light purple, and then this kind of light bluish membrane around all 3 of these cell drawings. That's the cell membrane, and the cell membrane is made out of fat, out of lipids, called phospholipids. The last category of biological molecules is nucleic acids. The monomer of nucleic acids is called a nucleotide. And when we put multiple nucleotides together, our polymer is called a nucleic acid. And we may call it a nucleic acid. We may call it by its specific name. There's only two nucleic acids, DNA or RNA. So nucleic acids are like this. They're made of multiple similar but not identical monomers connected together, similar to proteins. And let me show you some examples and what the overall structure looks like. So here's DNA. And here we have our monomers, our DNA nucleotides that are all separated from each other. And they're actually complex. They consist of three different parts that you'll learn about later in this course: a phosphate group, a sugar, and a nitrogenous base. But this whole little package is a nucleotide monomer. And when they're attached together, they form this double-stranded structure. This is our DNA polymer. Here's RNA. And again, we've got some nucleotides that are all freely floating. You can see the letter on each of these doesn't represent an element or an atom. You might have heard of these before. These are the letters of DNA and RNA: adenine, cytosine, thymine, guanine, and then we've got uracil down here in RNA. And you don't need to know those for now. And then here, this is our RNA polymer. We've connected multiple RNA nucleotides together into a single-stranded polymer because RNA likes to be single-stranded, not double-stranded. And again, you'll learn more about that later in the course. Let's talk quickly about the function of nucleic acids. DNA stores genetic information for the cell, and RNA transfers and interprets that genetic information. All of the instructions for how to make you and keep you functioning as you, they're all written down in the language of DNA and then translated by RNA and used to do stuff. So examples of nucleic acids are DNA and RNA. And that's our last category of biological molecule. So let's take one last look at this amazing drawing of all the molecules inside of a cell. We can see all of these long strands. Those are actin fibers, and we can imagine things walking along those actin fibers. We see lots of proteins that are doing stuff. We see our lipids in the cell membrane. We see, actually here, so this is an interesting thing called a ribosome that's reading some RNA, and it's going to be making some more proteins. Here we've got some carbohydrates. This is cellulose providing structural support to the outside of a bacterial cell, which is actually what we're looking at here. So we've got a ton of different polymers here, a ton of different large molecules, and I hope this is interesting and exciting to you. Take a look at what your cells look like when you zoom up close enough. It's pretty cool. Thanks for watching, everybody.